So, thank you for coming. I guess that's difficult a bit, a time where there's free pizza and all of that. But nevertheless, I'd like to present you a project that has been occupying most of my time for the past year, and that has been the construction of a disco ceiling at my house. So the goal of this presentation is to talk a bit about the journey that led to the construction of this ceiling. And it was supposed to be like this. So last year, around May, I decided that I wanted to change my living room and install a disco ceiling. And in my best wishes, it was supposed to take about 5 months. But in reality, it was a very different journey. And what I'll talk about in this presentation is the challenges that I found while doing this. So even though it took all this time, you might wonder, was it worth it? So why spending so much time doing this kind of stuff? And to answer that, I'll show you a quick video that maybe, we have no sound. I don't feel it. Yeah. I'll just stop it for a bit. Even without the sound. Yeah, but the sound makes a different impact. So let's see if we can get it. I think that we have enough time. I won't take more than 30 minutes talking about it. Nem sei se vale a pena estarmos a falar em inglês, mas não. Se calhar é só para efeitos da gravação. Não sei se... Yeah. Well, maybe we can see the video with just wait for a few seconds more. It can't be a disco ceiling without sound. No? Okay, maybe at the end I can replay the video. So just let's look at it without the sound. You can imagine it in your ad. But this is the final looks of the ceiling. So this is my living room, and this is how it looks when we are in full disco mode there at my house. So I think that's a bit more impressive than this small panel that I brought just for demo purposes. Actually, you have to be there to get the proper feel of the scale of the thing. It's almost at the end by now. Okay, so I hope this answers the question if was it worth or not. Indeed it was. It was quite a challenge, and it took a lot of time to build, but I think that the end result is worth it. So I didn't talk about myself at the beginning. I wanted to start by showing the final looks. But I'm Hugo Lourenço. I'm a computer engineer by profession, and I work at OutSystems for quite a long time already. This presentation doesn't have to do with OutSystems itself. I have some connections with OutSystems in the work I'll be presenting, but this is mostly an hobby of mine. So I've been using computers for a long time, around the ZX Spectrum era. I asked my parents to buy me a computer, and that was the first computer that I ever used. And I spent most of my time with it hacking rather than playing with it. I found it much more interesting to do stuff rather than just playing games. Around at the same time, I was also become interested in electronics, so I asked my parents to buy me an electronic kit. But the problem with electronics is that by that time it seemed very complicated and confusing. And so I left electronics behind and I focused on computers. But if you fast forward 20 years, a lot has changed in the meantime. And the main thing that appeared was the Arduino platform. And Arduino sparked the interest in electronics again, mainly because using Arduinos, I don't know if you are familiar with Arduinos. When using Arduinos, you are most of the time dealing with software and not exactly with hardware, because there are a lot of pre-built modules that you can buy and connect them with Arduino in a Lego-like fashion. So it's very simple to build things without having to know electronics from electronics very deeply. So by the time I found it out, okay, I think that now we can. Maybe a bit louder? Yeah. Let's engage disco mode fully. I think it's nicer with the music. Now the living room is empty, but you can imagine with a crowd of people there, it's getting quite interesting. Okay, so moving on, I had already skipped some of the slides here. And I was talking that by the time I found the Arduino platform, electronics gained a new meaning for me. And by this time I had moved to my new house. This was about 8 years ago. And then I started automating the house, using Arduinos all over the place. And so I started using it for controlling the air conditioner, to deploy a weather station and see how things were around the house. Also to turn on the hot water system automatically, and to control the shutter systems and all that. But then I found about LEDs, and that led me to wondering what should I do with them. So I found these very nice LEDs, the kind of LEDs that I'm using here. These are LED strips that have a very interesting characteristic. That is that I can control each LED individually to the color that I like, and I can control it using a microcontroller. So when I found about these LEDs, the next move was to start using LEDs around the house, and one of my first projects was to use this as a mood light on my couch, and of course I had to create an app for controlling it. Then something happened. I had some troubles in my house during the rain season, and part of the ceiling fell. And when this happened, I started wondering if I should do something about the ceiling. Instead of just fixing it and covering it again, I began wondering if I could start a larger project than the one with the couch, and completely fill or almost fill the ceiling with LED lights. And that was the beginning of this journey. So first of all, I had to decide on how big this was going to be. And I wanted to cover a pretty large area of 9 by 4. I wanted to use this not only as a disco ceiling, obviously, but also as a replacement for the illumination that I had in my living room. So I want this to be autonomous also. So I needed quite a few LEDs around there to have an adequate light level. I wanted this to be easy to fix because LEDs are robust, but nevertheless, sooner or later, one of them will die. And when using these LED strips, if one of the LEDs goes down, the rest of the strip becomes completely off. So I wanted to do this a modular design, and I needed to cover the ceiling with a lot of modules to be able to do that. I wanted this also to be nice looking, so I had a boring white ceiling. I was going to replace it by something else. I didn't want the ceiling to be boring again. So instead of making it all white, I wanted to have a nice pattern there, and I opted for something like this, inspired in Mondrian paintings, but using a more neutral palette. Then I was replacing the lights at living room, and I want this to be easy for anyone to use. So if you think I could use, and I am using my smartphone to control the lights, but I also wanted this to be as easy for me as, for example, for my mother. So when my mother goes to my house, she just needs to use the switch at the wall like she has always done in the past. And the final solution that I had to face is, am I going to do all of this on my own, or am I going to buy pre-built modules? And as you might suspect, I opted to build it by myself. The main reasons was that I couldn't find anything that was exactly what I wanted, but even then, the models were just too expensive because I had to buy so many. By this time, I found that Arduino was not going to make it. Arduino, or at least Arduinos like Arduino Uno, are not powerful enough to control such a large matrix. So I found this other microcontroller that is much more powerful than an Arduino, but it's extremely cheap. I don't know if you have already read about it, but it costs about €3 or €4, $3 or $4 for this kind of module, and it's really very easy to use. And finally, I decided to use a different LED strip from the ones I presented before because they had several benefits when compared to the older ones. So having decided on the basic ingredients, I started prototyping, and this was my first prototype that I built using some cheap and easy to use materials, but of course not with the purpose of being the final stuff. And when looking for the materials for the final stuff, I looked at wood mainly because wood is easy to work with. I had to upgrade my tools because I didn't have adequate tools to work with wood. And with that, I built a second prototype using MDF. This one is colored because I was testing to see which colors would work better in my ceiling. And when I finished it, I finally realized that after having spent almost one day building one of these, I had to spend even more time building the final ones, and I needed 72 modules for my ceiling. So by this time, I decided that I had to outsource, and I contacted a woodworking workshop near me, and they produced the wood panels for me. So they used an automated cutting machine. I sent them the blueprints for the panels, and 3 weeks later, I received my panels fully painted and very nice looking and ready to the next steps. So by this time, what I thought is now for the next 2 months, maybe I'll just have to pick up these wood panels and then glue the LEDs behind the panels, and everything will be fine. But then the first problem occurred. When I was planning for the modules, the panels, I didn't realize that I should have followed standards, namely, if I was going to put this to the ceiling, there are drop ceiling mounts, and if I had followed standard measures, it would be quite easy to put this into the ceiling. But unfortunately, my panels were just a bit too small. Fortunately, I was able to contact a drop ceiling company, and they were able to hack their system to my needs. So they what they do, they made the separation between the mounting rails smaller, and then provided that I keep the modules always at the ceiling, everything stays in place. But if I start removing a couple of them, then everything will fall apart. Then I had also some power problems. I skipped when choosing the the power supply for the LEDs. I went for the chip option, and when I finally started putting the LEDs on the ceiling, I discovered that these were a bit on the low quality side, so I was losing too much power on these power connectors, and the LEDs were not lighting up properly, because LEDs have to have a minimum voltage for them to light up, and if the resistance is too high, they won't light up as they should. So, but in this case, the solution was easy. I just had to replace the wires by thicker wires, and everything was okay. And then challenge 3 was that my experience in the electronic side is not very high. So as I told you before, I'm more of a software guy. And when working at the prototype level, everything was okay. But when I moved to the ceiling scale, I reached into a problem. That is, if you have long wires and fast digital signals going through those wires, things don't go as well as you might think. So at the end of a long wire, the signal was so distorted that the communication between the controller and the LEDs was not good enough, and I had some visual artifacts. So if you look at here, I had like some random pixels at the ceiling because there were communication errors occurring. So I had to research again, and I found about RS486, 485, sorry. That is a standard protocol that is used, for instance, in industrial settings, and it is used whenever you are in a noisy environment. So you have long wires or a lot of electromagnetic noise, and using this you can make a digital signal go clean from the transmitter to the receiver. Okay, so in this case, the solution was easy. I changed this to use that protocol, and finally I was ready to start building the prototypes for their final look. So fast forward a year, what I got was finally my LED ceiling completed, and this is how it looks during the day. So when lights are off, I want it to look pretty. I hope you find it pretty also. Then when night comes, I turn on the lights, and it's also very relaxing to look at these lights. So the LEDs are not static. They are like these ones slowly fading and changing color. So it's quite a nice effect. And then, of course, there are disco nights, and when at disco nights, I have to have a more colorful look to the ceiling. Okay? So and then this is how it looks when you turn on the lights. So instead of a big bang-like light, you have this nice effect. Some implementation details. This for the ones that might be wondering how I've actually done this. So I'm using a microcontroller. As you have seen in these pictures, the ceiling is quite big, so I decided to split it in several rows instead of having a single strip running across the ceiling. And so I decided to run the strips in parallel in order to make sure that the refresh rate for the ceiling was small enough that I won't have screen tearing effects on the ceiling. So I opted to use parallel outputs. So I'm using a single microcontroller to control 9 different LED strips. They all share a clock signal. They have their own data signal. Then for the communication bus, it's just standard procedure. So I used a recommended design for this. In this case, the bus is for each section is transmitting 4 signals, so 1 clock signal and 3 data signals, one for each individual row in that part of the ceiling. And finally, at the beginning, I started by making my own PCBs, so I using the usual stuff for making PCBs. I made one on my own, but then I wanted to have something more future-proof and with higher quality standards, so I decided to order them from China, of course. So I made the design myself, and then I ordered them from China, and they were very, very cheap to build. So the way I'm connecting the controller to the several LED strips is using Ethernet cable, and this works pretty well. And this is just a picture of the controller board with one of the transmitters attached. So you can see here that there are 3 different sections. I can plug in 3 different transmitters here, one for each section of the ceiling, and that's it. Okay, so for the ones that didn't see the movie at the beginning, now you can see it in action again. Thank you. I forgot to show something else. I'll just let the movie run to the end. That's it. The final thing that I have to show you is that I can also control this using the smartphone. So not only the light switch at the wall, but I've built a very simple application using the OutSystems platform, of course, that I can use to control my LED lights. So if I'm in for a more warmer look or a more cold look, it's very easy to change the LED lights around the house. Usually I'm more for a whiter look, but when I'm sad, maybe I'll put a warmer color to lighten me up. Okay? So thank you. I don't know if you have any questions. I'm free to answer them. And if you want to see this in a closer look, you're free to come here and touch it. And, yeah?